Well, hello and welcome back. Today we're gonna take a look at Diablo 4. And I know what you're thinking. Nico, didn't you refund this game like 30 times? I did. But I did get it from Blizzard for free through their social media campaign thing. And I was like, I think it would be a shame to not at least try it and see if I was right or not. And as you can see from the title, it's a 4.5 out of 10 so far, and we'll get into that right away. But I want to say one thing real quick. I think it's not as gloom and doom as that number would suggest, and I think the game has potential to grow further than this. Which, by the way, is a little bit of a different outlook than I had, during the beta, because I thought it's not going to get any better. But I think there's a chance that over time this will improve quite a bit. But let's get into the specifics first. Let's get into the story and the lore, which I skipped through most of it because I wanted to level fast. And as you saw before, I'm around level 54, so I've done the entire campaign. But since I'm not really paying attention to that too much, it's my opinion on that is obviously not very, valuable. But from what I can tell and from what people are telling me, the story and the lore is really good, and there's a lot to explore in that department. So if you're into that, this game probably is already a 6 to 7 out of 10, honestly. I also want to talk about the launch so far. There have been a couple of hiccups, especially yesterday, but overall, outside of some minor and major bugs here and there, there's not that much that I can complain about here. Honestly, I think for a game this big, with this many copies sold already, presumably at least, it's been pretty smooth, honestly, and I didn't expect that because the betas were a lot more bumpy, but it seems that they learned from that, and so I think so far the launch has been really good, and I have to give them props for that. I have to really give them props for that, and I also have to give them props for listening to so much feedback even before that already, like my teleport video and a lot of others, like small but also important things were fixed before launch, and even some balance changes here and there. So I think it's been really good to provide that feedback for the devs, and that this is what this video is also trying to do, of course. So far the devs have been very receptive to feedback, and they deserve props for that as well. On top of that, I think the attention to detail, especially in the environments and overall, and some of the areas in the game is the best in the genre by far. There's nothing that you can really contest here. But speaking of the map and this, let's get into the size of the map. The map is massive. Okay, that's a huge map, but I think this is kind of a marketing stunt more so than important to the game. And I say that because the map is, while gigantic, there's not really a whole lot of diversity. So even if you are, on the north side of the map or at the very south side of the map, which is super far away from each other, they're still mostly the same monsters. Still, even if you go into the dungeons feel same-ish. The bosses are all the same, really. This fucking whatever this is called, Khazra Abomination, this boss is literally in every dungeon. Imagine you go through a dungeon for 10 minutes, pick up all the shitty stones to open a door, and then you have to kill every mob in the entire dungeon, and then you have to fucking do some other shit, and then at the end there's the same boss again that you've already fought 30 times. It's very boring, very fast, and I think that's what the biggest problem with the map is. I think the mounts weren't designed for the map. I think the map was designed for the mounts. What is this here? Kill the things to open the door. Oh my god, what a fucking creative way to... listen guys, I don't know how much longer I can last. And I think the map was also designed to market this massive world, which doesn't really feel like a massive world if everything is kind of the same, every event feels same-ish as well. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues this game has, because it's kind of it gives you this expectation of exploration and this massive environment, but in reality that's not really what you're getting. In reality, it's just a lot of recycling, 115 dungeons of the same mobs. Every event is kind of the same, and even events inside of dungeons can be found outside of dungeons sometimes, or in these little caverns and whatever. it's a lot of recycling and very little exploration of new things, and I think that's one of the biggest issues, that I think mounts were probably just implemented to sell skins, and the map is just this big to market something that it really isn't. And I think that's what's very disappointing to people, because there's so much there. Oh my god, I can't wait to get there. And then you get there and it's just the same shit, you know? And there's also one major issue that I think kind of ties into that, and that is you have 35 waypoints, 115 dungeons, 160 altars of Lilith also, although those, you know, you can actually collect once and you never have to do them again. 15 strongholds and 213 side quests. I don't understand how you can create an ARPG around collectibles. ARPG is all about replayability. Collectibles is probably one of the least replayable things in gaming in general. Like, if I go back to, it doesn't matter what game it is, if I go back to Lost Ark or whatever, and I have to collect all the Mokoko seeds and all of the sea bounties and all that shit again, I would never do that. So like creating this gameplay loop of every season you go through all of that again, and even worse, I think in hardcore or even in softcore, if you create a new character, although the checkpoints of the Renown will be transferred over, you know, like getting the skill points and getting the potion capacity and whatever. But if you haven't completely finished one like reward track of a zone, your reward starts from 0 again. That includes almost everything, by the way. So what does that mean? So if your first character hasn't completely finished Fractured Peaks, your second character will start obviously without them, you know, without it maxed out as well, but with 0 renown in that area. So what does that mean? You need to do the entire thing again. And I would assume you have to do the entire thing again every season as well, which honestly, like from the ground up, this is a huge and massive problem that I don't know if that's very easily addressed really, but it just seems so nonsensical to me that you make an ARPG around collectibles. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, doing those collectibles is, as I said, also very boring because everything is repetitive and recycled. So even if you do the dungeon here in Fractured Peaks and then you do another dungeon in Kyrgyzstan, it's kind of the same thing, like with same mechanics and maybe even the same boss. So like you have like kill all the mobs and you have kill some tumor looking thing, oh my god, you know, like this, or carry some shit to a door. This problem was already there in the beta and it was already boring in the beta, but if you do it in every single map all around with 115 dungeons, and then you have to do it again in Endgame too, we will get into that, and then you pair that with, you know, mob variety, you know, 0 boss variety, mob density is really odd and weird sometimes. Even the like structural part of dungeons is often just copied to an extent, at least not completely, but like partitions of the dungeon are just literally the exact same. And then you pair that with another very problematic system, and that is the world scaling. So if you don't know what that means, is basically the entire world scales with your character, well, at least upwards. So as in, like, if you're level 20, a level 10 area will now also be level 20. But if you're level 20 and you go into a level 40 area, that level 40 area is still level 40. What does that mean? Well, 2 things. First of all, your character never feels like it's overpowering the area it's in until you get to tier 3 and like get into really good scaling, but that's a different topic. So during the leveling process, it always feels like your character is very weak. And on top of that, obviously, if you go into higher level areas, and especially I played through the entire story in World Tier 2, obviously the smart play is to go into World Tier 1 because it's easier, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, and it feels like your character is degressing rather than progressing. And obviously that's not what an RPG should feel like. And I mean, there's also like a more major problem here as well, and that is the character doesn't change a whole lot because there's such a small skill tree. There's not a whole lot going on, right? Like there's during the leveling process until you get to the Paragon board, your character does not really change a whole lot, and you're kind of at the mercy of legendary drops. So if you're unlucky like me, I had like 3 legendary drops by the time I was level 30 or 35, most of which were not good. Your character just feels like the same for like 20 levels. and it doesn't like, getting a level up doesn't excite you really, because most of the things you're getting does not change your playstyle at all. So the leveling process paired with the terrible open world and the repetitive dungeons, I can see a lot of people straight out quitting before even getting to the end game, because it's so boring. And yeah, like even some of these bosses, they like, some people say there's like 5 bosses in the game. I think it's probably not 5, but like 10. But that does make it a whole lot better if you fight the same boss over and over and over again. And if I see another one of these fucking Khazra abominations, I'm gonna fucking find it, dude. And that also like pairs into the mob AI being terrible too. So like, I have a clip here of me trying to play a Thorns build, and then I use one of my, you know, Thorn shouts, and this is what happens. Look at this! Yeah, I fucking taunt them and they stand still for 10 seconds! So overall, I think this game was kind of made for like quantity over quality, which is sad, you know, that's just what it is. But obviously to interact with all of this content, you need combat. And the combat of Diablo IV is kind of a hit and miss for me. Generally, I think it's quite fluid and polished, but you know, as expected from a Blizzard game, but somehow some abilities feel very clunky and also very unimpactful. I think the best example for this is Whirlwind. Whirlwind of the Barbarian is, well, considered one of the best builds, if not the best build in the entire game. And from the get-go, I was like, yeah, I like spin to win playstyle, let's try it out. And then when I tried it out, it's like, when you actually use, like, even if you saw videos from like Rob from the block, and like seeing people like completely decimate the endgame with Whirlwind, but when you use it yourself, it feels more like doing the helicopter with your flaccid cock, like swimming noodle, you know, from the pool. And it's like, just like you're spinning and there's no impact whatsoever. It just feels fucking floaty and weird. So some abilities feel really bad. So for me, what I did, I'm playing a build that is actually quite bad, I think. But it just feels more fun because the ability is actually impactful, and that is Deathblow. So for me, there's some abilities in the game that are just like, feel really good. And there's some abilities in the game that just feel really floaty and clunky to an extent. And all of that wouldn't be too bad if, you know, you had the choice to just pick whatever ability you want, but it's also not really the case. First, you have this, you know, sorry excuse of a skill tree, which doesn't really allow you to customize anything. And then you pair that with the RNG of legendary and unique drops. And well, there's a lot of, like, for example, for Barbarian, there's a lot of core skills do this, core skills do that. If you don't want to play a core skill, bad luck, you know, and especially during the leveling, this feels bad when there is not an abundance of legendary powers. So a lot of people during the leveling just play Pulverize on Druid or Upheaval or Rend or something that just, you know, makes the leveling a little bit easier, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of choice on which one you pick if you want to be somewhat efficient. And also, like in any other ARPG, a lot of the scalings are obviously tied to multiplicative you know, stats. So in this game, there's only really 2 multiplicative stats as far as I know, and that is crit or crit damage and vulnerability, and to an extent attack speed, I guess. But overall, that makes it for very boring build options, and there's very little you can do. So if your ability, you know, is you somehow can't have vulnerability up while you use it, or somehow you can't crit with it, like Thorns, for example, your scaling is gonna suffer a lot. And that makes it for a very linear and very shallow build customization game, which obviously isn't very good for an ARPG. So there's very little innovation in builds, although we will probably see a couple things that no one else saw in the betas, but overall there's very little of that. And that also ties into the next point, the information surrounding it, because as you know, when the embargo lifted, there were a bunch of people all of a sudden, a bunch of content creators, a bunch of like videos popping up of people that literally played already like hundreds of hours of the game, and maybe even completely finished the game and got to level 100 and killed everything in the game already before it even released, which obviously usually is just the case for internal testing, but this time that was not how it worked out. So that being said, I think a lot of this mystery and exploration was already kind of taken away, which is you know, not really exclusive to Diablo 4. Every game has that problem nowadays, I think. So having that is just makes everything feel a little bit, you know, smaller, because everything is already so explored, and because everything is relatively shallow build variety wise and itemization wise, that really didn't help. Well, we can also talk about the endgame, but unfortunately this is pretty much exactly what everyone expected. A lot of repetitive, recycled content that ranges from giving you like a checklist to, you know, chasing events and world bosses, or repeating the same dungeon over and over, you know, Mythic Plus style with the nightmare dungeons. And again, like, this just makes everything a little bit worse, I think, although it gives a little bit of flavor to some of the dungeons for sure. Some of those augmentations and some of those positive augments are actually pretty good. But because the leveling is already very repetitive and all of the renown farming is very repetitive, doing it all again over and over through Three of Whispers or Nightmare Dungeons, again, doesn't really help the game feel good, because you're just doing the same thing again, the same boring bosses, the same boring layouts, the same boring tasks, but you do it again. So the only real chase here, and the fun that I'm having, is chasing items, right? It's an ARPG after all, but even that is, you know, a lot of RNG, and it will take a long time. So I think a lot of people, even at this point here, if they do get to tier 3 content, world tier 3 content, will feel like, oh wait, I have to do the same shit again, and I have to farm a lot of renown to get the Paragon points. I'm not sure about that. I will say this though, I think the Paragon boards are better than I expected, because they give you a lot of options, and there's actually a lot of nuance to it, and how to like actually maneuver your boards properly, and how many points you want to spend here and there, and also the incremental like level up Paragon points that you get also feels quite good. So I think that entire thing is a success. I think the Paragon board was a great idea, and so far I really enjoyed that. Oh yeah, and then you also have Fields of Hatred for the people that are wondering about PvP. Ah, there's a dude. Let me attack. It's exactly how you expect ARPG PvP to go, because the scaling is so exponential that obviously someone that is just 2 levels above you can literally one-tap you, right? Then there's also world bosses, which are loot pinatas. For example, this footage that you see in the background right now was me doing that world boss for the very first time, and I didn't even use a single potion, because there's no mechanics. The hardest one is probably a Shava actually, and that one, once you know that you can just stand behind it and you will never get hit, also is super easy, right? So the world bosses are, you know, as expected as in any fucking RPG ever. Literally, you just roll them over and there's not much to it. And then I was also kind of disappointed by the capstone dungeon, because it had the same boring ass mechanics in it, the same boring ass monsters in it, and even the boss was then reused like multiple times in the open world dungeons. Like, it's also was quite disappointing, honestly. And I did it very early, so it wasn't even super easy, because I was way too under-leveled for it with a terrible build. But yeah, I still thought it was quite boring. One thing though I will say, especially for the looting in this game, I think it would really help if you could, you know, inspect an item while it's still on the floor. I think the entire inventory management is already kind of annoying, but if you can't even look at items that are laying on the floor, it makes it even worse. And I think that's kind of a console thing, that they, you know, wanted to have that so the console players don't feel left out or whatever. I'm not really sure, because I've never played an RPG on a console, so if you know more about that, please enlighten me. But it doesn't feel good, and also not having a loot filter on top of that, especially the further you go, it also doesn't feel that great. So just to come back to the point again, to like do all of the collectibles every 3 months, I think that's probably the biggest issue. I don't think most people want to do the collectibles ever again. So the solution here is to make it at least completely account-wide every season, so that each renown that you collect on one character is directly put into the next character, without only the incremental like goals that you can carry over, but everything. At least during a season, if not entirely. Like, I wouldn't mind just having everything unlocked once and then never having to do it again, and just choosing the dungeons and choosing the content that I want for leveling up, you know? And we didn't even mention the price yet. Obviously, $70 to $100 for a quite a repetitive and well, short-term experience, I think is a completely different problem of its own. And then you also pair that with a almost mobile game cash out with a battle pass, and like, oh, you buy $100 worth of coins, you get more. Like, they're kind of you know, manipulating people into spending more money and all that shit is a very bad look. And I think that's also something they should definitely take notes of, although I don't think they will, because it's Blizzard. You know, Blizzard likes money, Bobby needs a new yacht, so hey, let's put another battle pass in there, dude. And you can also talk about things like map overlay and all small other things. Actually, for the people with the map overlay, the biggest tip I have is just marking things on the map and then just not opening the map and just following the marker. But I agree, I think a map overlay would make it better too. Now listen up, like, after all of these, you know, complaints, because there's a lot, like, a lot of the classes feel terrible, a lot of the content feels terrible, a lot of it feels completely repetitive, and the skill tree is bad, and the monetization is bad, and you know, the end game loop is very recycled and boring as well. And I mean, I haven't killed the final boss, which is you know, at level 100 or whatever, but even during the storyline, the bosses were also not great, and bosses in general were not great. All that being said, right? All that being said, I think this game still has potential, and I say that because the abilities that do feel good feel really good. Like, I actually really enjoy pressing death blow and just one-tapping things and getting the reset off of that. It feels good, it feels nice, it feels, you know, engaging, and that's really, that's a good thing to have this early into a game. I think if they, you know, fix out a lot of these things, and if they implement a lot more content, and I hope they don't stagger content, you know, oh my god, we just didn't implement all this stuff because of season 1, guys, don't worry about it. Like, this kind of, don't stagger it, don't stall the content. Just, like, if it makes the game better, release it, you know? If it makes the game more enjoyable, do it. You don't have that many chances to release a game, okay? Obviously, maybe the first season, you could argue, you know, is another really big factor of people like, okay, I'm gonna buy it now. So what I'm saying is, please, I hope the devs are just as receptive to feedback as they were in the beta. This 4.5 out of 10 that I'm giving it right now could easily be a 7, if not higher, if you guys like really put in the effort to make the game feel less repetitive and more build customization. Like, those two things alone will make it like insanely better. I hope they do that. I hope they have something crazy planned for season 1, and please don't stall the content because you're saying, oh my god, in the expansion we will put it in, or we will put it in season 2. Put it into season 1. If you have good shit, put it into season 1. I think it's crucial for the game's success that season 1 is good. And same thing for leaderboards, by the way. And also, if you want to make another race, please make it solo self-found. No trading, no grouping. I think all of that, watching all that right now is actually kind of off-putting too. So please do that. The game could be good eventually. Right now it's not. Right now it's, I think, a little bit below average, and that's why it's a 4.5. But if you can somehow salvage, you know, all of the good systems of the game and put it into you know, into better environments, I think the game could actually be good. But yeah, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Nico Tulo, and this was Diablo 4.5 out of 10. If you want to see more MMO and RPG content, consider subscribing, and yeah, see you in the next video. Thank you and peace.